Sometimes it seems like a formula just wouldn't work. You'd think a combination of ingredients from a franchise I never cared for, a publisher I have massive concerns with, and a genre that tends to attract toxicity, that the result would be an unforgiving mess. And yet here I am pleasantly surprised. The sentiment didn't carry universally, and complaints are valid complaints, but at least I get to play a game I actually enjoy for once. The side quest I did on this game previously didn't make any of my hopes false. Let's set sail for the grind. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Cloud Pirates. Cloud Pirates is a Wargaming-style arena shooter featuring floating pirate ships and taking place within the Allods Online universe. Fitting then that it's developed by Allods team and published by My.com, which I'm pretty sure is information that just had more than a few of you shut the video off. Cloud Pirates features the same factions and the game's Astral Ships. Unlike Allods Online, which starts out as a grindy WoW clone until it suddenly mutates into Guns of Icarus at endgame, Cloud Pirates cuts through all the fluff by just having you control the ships directly, Wargaming style. Cloud Pirates has been described by some as a Dreadnought ripoff, by others as a fantasy version of Fractured Space, and is probably most accurately described as the space combat in Star Trek Online, but as its own video game. You have the 3D space with vertical and steering style movement as if piloting a submarine, as well as needing to consider the facing of your vessel and the distance to your target, but very few abilities and attacks have a lock-on feature. There's a lot of interesting mechanics involved, even if this might feel generally familiar to a lot of people. So let's see if the Astral Ships are the only reason to play Allods Online, and find out how they'd fare in an arena shooter. If you're familiar with Allods Online, this game very much fits that aesthetic, including art of factions and races from that game. If you're unfamiliar with the art style of Allods, it's fairly standard, but very colorful high fantasy, and Cloud Pirates features plenty of floating islands covered in grass and moss, or frosty fields of ice surrounding a massive dragon skeleton. The ships themselves combine some classic Age of Sail looks, especially on the Canyon side, while the Zataganian side looks slightly more like modern ships, though both use sails made of translucent force fields. Hope you like hexagons. While purely functional, there's a general issue with the graphics that's not really representing hitboxes properly. Best example I can think of involves the all-too-plenty occasions where your shots or torpedoes will sail directly through an enemy ship. I could easily attribute that to lag, as it's a common issue in some matches, considering the game connects you to people across the Atlantic. What I can't accept as merely a connection issue is how often collision detection of both ships and projectiles is completely off. I've flown close to nearby rocks only to inexplicably bounce off of them and get my steering tossed aside, while other obstacles were practically able to be passed through. Worse yet is doing a long-range shot and watching one of the projectiles suddenly get blocked by the air a few feet away from a nearby boulder. It's a design flaw that can frustrate parts of the experience that can already be frustrating for plenty of other reasons, but the overall aesthetic works, and it's at least easy to understand what you're looking at. I cannot fault this game for its music one bit, save for the fact that I can't find it posted anywhere, and I had to manually record it all for this video, all 3 tracks worth. You can expect that Pirates of the Caribbean / Age of Sail style of sea shanty orchestrations, with the high fantasy instruments to make them feel more driving of the action, even if they aren't as prevalent in the matches. Music will cut off after a short while, and return after a decent period of silence, but if you want to keep it looping, there's an option in the audio settings to do so. Sound design does its job quite well, with a few hiccups. The shots aren't exactly booming cannons, but I was hardly expecting any kind of realism here. What's nice is that the shots all sound distinct enough from each other to know what kind of shot is heading your way, as rapid-fire cannons have a distinct repeated pop, compared to bow-fired heavy cannons, or the quick spray fire of the volley cannons. You can easily tell what's being fired, even when enemies aren't visible, once you get used to it. Hit noises are distinct as well, but I have to make a special mention of the healing rounds, as standard healing in the game is done by shooting your allies with the healing rounds. If you don't know this, you might wonder why your ally is suddenly shooting you, and it's not helped by the fact that healing rounds make a similar impact noise as if you were being shot at by a damaging round. And friendly fire is a mechanic in this game. I feel like this really should be adjusted in some manner to not confuse allies, so they don't try to light you up for thinking you're a team killer. It's also nice that there's a match announcer to start the battle, as well as update happenings within the match, who speaks in a delightfully over-the-top pirate voice, unabashedly uttering things like, "Shiver me timbers!" The game starts out with a pretty basic tutorial, as it only teaches you how to move, aim, fire, use skills, and capture points. It won't give you the basic nuances of each ship class, or a chance to play them before diving into matches, so you might feel frustrated if you decide to play as anything but a medium cruiser, made all the worse by the fact that the Versus AI mode seems to have been removed completely. Movement is basic boat steering, using W and S to move forward and back, and A and D to steer, with the addition of a third plane of movement, so you can rise and fall with space and shift respectively. Steering is also how you'll turn your boat to fire its cannons, as you only have 3 firing sides, left, right, and front, aka the bow cannons. When you're facing to fire the bow cannons, the targeting reticle will be a triangle, while either broadside facing will be a circle. Left-click to fire and use the mouse wheel to zoom in and get a better shot. You have to keep an eye on the range of the guns you're about to fire, as well as their heat level, as some guns will overheat after firing for a good while, and others will overheat after a single shot. Overheating requires you to cool down before they can be fired again. Skills are usable icons with long cooldowns that'll have different properties, usually involving a toggle between different firing modes, like a chance to set the opponent on fire being toggled into a lower cooldown with less of a heat effect, to simpler things like teleports, shields, and healing, or more situational skills like damaging enemies in a radius while restoring your health, or a reactor explosion that'll cause high damage the lower health you are while sacrificing your own ship in the process. Engineering boats and heal boats use a reactor energy gauge for some of their skills, leaving some of them on a fairly low cooldown, but requiring a portion of energy that they can only build by damaging enemies or healing allies. In another area where distinction between classes comes into play, certain classes mount certain guns, each with their own property. Torpedo clippers will always mount slow-moving, high-damage torpedoes as their bow guns, while sniper galleons will always mount long-range sniper cannons for theirs. There's a bit of room to play around with, as the 2 previous examples can have different type of torpedoes or sniper shots respectively. Perhaps you want to sacrifice raw damage, instead fire torpedoes more often, or you want your sniper shots to actually slow the enemies they hit. Besides the bow weapons, each broadside cannon can fall into various types. Single shot, which is exactly what it sounds like. Rapid fire, again, name on the tin, but with the added bonus of increasing damage when fired against the same target repeatedly. Volley, which means every gun on the side will fire in a small sequential burst. Multi-charge, which acts like a shotgun and fires every round at once in a large spray pattern, so getting close is vital. Heal rounds can take on a few of those properties, usually rapid fire or volley. Each ship can, in theory, mount all of the various types, though it does seem dependent per boat rather than per class, as some ships, like engineering boats, can equip healing cannons for their broadsides, but others can't. Ship classes are broken down into a few types: battleships, clippers or corvettes, support, cruisers, and sniper galleons. There's a bit of variety within each group, as support can mean both the engineering ships like the Furnace or the healing ships like the Hope. Given that, it isn't a surprise that ships of the same type can play completely differently from each other, like the torpedo clippers don't play the same way torpedo corvettes do, or the standard battleships versus the heavy galleons, which while both being a battleship class, have different strengths, weaknesses, and abilities. For what we do have, medium cruisers, or as I like to call it the nub tub, seem to be the most newbie-friendly of all the ships, as they only lead straight down in the tech tree with no branches leading into other ship lines. These are your simple attack ships. They focus down on medium and lights, while the vast majority of your armament and skills can automatically track the target. Changing from that, we have the medium assault cruisers, which are designed to barrel straight in, blasting heavy shotgun cannons from the bow, firing off abilities that can cripple ships or destroy shields, and teleporting out. Assault cruisers can branch off to become interceptor cruisers at max tier. Torpedo clippers function much like medium assault cruisers with one major change, in that they gain defensive buffs based on their movement speed and have torpedoes that don't home in on targets but do far more damage. These are the fastest ships in the game, meant to be assassination boats and useful for snagging up abandoned capture points and power-ups quickly. At Tier 1 they'll feel incredibly overpowered, being able to kill all light and medium ships with one well-placed salvo. And once you get to Tier 2 onwards though, their entire role becomes far more selective, and they can only really kill healing ships without issue. Torpedo clippers can transition into support clippers at Tier 3. Heavy sniper galleons function exactly as you would imagine they do, but with a major oddity. While it is true they snipe vessels from long range, they're also incredibly more durable than you would think, taking lots of punishment to put down, and they can be played as a medium-range engagement vessel easily. They can also mount equipment and cannons that'll cripple your movement speed, making them some of the most annoying ships to deal with in the game if they're left to their own devices. Too many players at Tier 1 play the sniper game a bit too literally, as they'll try to hide off in corners of the map or spawn points, and trying to deal damage while being nowhere near the battle, leaving them as slim pickings for a skilled cruiser or battleship. At Tier 2 they can branch out into the quicker moving version of the battleship class known as the Heavy Reinforced Galleon. Battleships are your typical damage sponges, which can shrug off a serious bruising if they aren't focused down quickly, but they can also put out a lot of steady firepower. The real downside, beyond its atrociously slow speed, is that it feels the most useless before you upgrade it, marking each time you get a new ship as just a new grind to become useful again. Battleships can branch into light torpedo corvettes at Tier 2 and medium interceptor cruisers at Tier 3. Engineering frigates build turrets that can attack enemies, put up wide detection rings, grant buffs and debuffs, or simply heal nearby allies. Their mechanic involves draining energy from enemy or allied ships and using it to construct their turrets, making them more dangerous the longer they've had time to feed off energy. Engineering frigates can branch off into the Heavy Reinforced Galleon at Tier 2 and light support clippers at Tier 3. Finally, we have the light support corvette, which act as the healing class within the game. Their guns do pitiful damage to enemies, but can constantly heal allies, while using abilities to grant buffs to friendly ships nearby, including a massive group heal with a long cooldown. These can branch off into 3 different ship classes, with the first being the Light Torpedo Corvette at Tier 2, a Light Stealth Corvette at Tier 3, and hilariously, the Strategic Heavy Battleship at Tier 4. Odd that said battleship can only be reached from 2 incredibly fragile classes, but role consistency doesn't seem to be a thing here. So now that you have your ship, exactly what you're going to be doing with it? Well, bots mode's right out, so I hope you like PvP. Unlike Wargaming stuff, in every mode, whenever you're killed, you'll be set into a wave-based spawn system, meaning sometimes you can get lucky and see merely a 2-second respawn timer, while others you might be waiting around for 30 seconds. Considering that some skills use player death as a mechanic, respawning is a welcome sight at least. There are the typical game types of Team Deathmatch and Capture the Point, with Deathmatch spawning team-wide power-ups for players to fight over, while Capture Point requires you to hold points long enough to fill your point total to 1,000. A few other modes make their appearance as well. Most uniquely would be the Treasure Hunt mode, where you pick up floating treasure and need to deliver it to one of 3 points, in a not exactly capture the flag, but kinda style of gameplay. A chest will turn one of 3 colors and needs to be brought to the appropriate color point and held there for 10 seconds. You can pass off the treasure to an ally by dropping it with E if you're being focused down, or you'd rather pass it to a faster or more defensive ship. Grindstone widely considers this the worst mode, and is often the mode that makes the majority of the call groan whenever it comes up, as teammates always seem to struggle with how it all works. The next unique mode, known as Payload Escort, is interesting but poorly implemented. The entire idea is to capture specific areas which will then cause a friendly ship to spawn, which needs to be escorted to an exit portal out of the area. The major problem with this mode is that it seems completely random, as how much health and shields the cargo ship spawns with seems to have no rhyme or reason. There is literally nothing to let you know if a capture you're getting will end up with a weak ship that must be escorted, or one of the hilariously nigh-invincible ships with near double the HP and shields that can be ignored and still arrive safely. We wonder why they didn't just normalize all of the ship's HP, as even if you're on the back foot with hundreds of points separating you from the winning team, they can still have the nigh-unkillable convoy ships spawn for their side. Last we get to the odd time-based game types, which are only active for a limited amount of time during the week. Of these 4, we've only managed to play Siege and Payload Convoy Plunder. Siege tasks attackers with dogpiling set capture points before destroying a battery at each, and finally blowing up the defending team's door. This game type is heavily weighted on the defending team's favor, and if they all choose to sit on the first capture point, you're probably not getting anywhere as an attacker if your team fails to coordinate. The supposed balance for this mode is that the first point spawns far away from the defending team's spawn, but given it's also filled with hostile turrets that support the defenders, it just makes it seem oddly weighted. Payload Convoy Plunder has one team attacking a large convoy of cargo ships while the other team is tasked to defend them. When an attacker manages to take down a cargo ship, that ship will drop a chest, leaving attackers able to snatch it and take it back to their portal, or defenders to try and take it and hold onto it for the rest of the match, essentially turning them into that missing cargo ship. The other 2 game types revolve around being in a brotherhood, or guild, with brotherhood battles or brotherhood outposts. Unfortunately, we never had enough people to even try these to begin with, as it requires you to not only be in a brotherhood, but also have at least 4 players online during that very small window they're open. After each battle, you'll be given points towards your research, used for unlocks of both new modules and at the same time for new ships, gold to be used to buy upgrades in ships, and lastly, experience for your captain. We want to take a brief moment here to explain that if you're familiar with how World of Warships or World of Tanks does its research system, you may be surprised. Cloud Pirates instead chose to follow in the footsteps of Armored Warfare, where all experience earned will go towards the next vehicle on the line from the word go. The upgrades you research for your vehicle all go toward that total. All you need to do is buy the boat once you're eligible and start the nightmare anew in your garbage stock boat. Captain experience is a little more straightforward, as it's a simple progression bar towards the next level with major unlocks coming at various points. At level 4, you get access to treasure maps, which act like loot boxes with heavy timers on them. At level 6, you'll gain access to the tavern and ship crews that'll give you a percentile bonus when slotted to your ships. And level 8 unlocks the ability to put points into captain skills that grant bonuses to all of your ships. With how vastly different each tier is in terms of balancing, the game can almost feel like a completely different experience with every boat in a new tier. Torpedo clippers feel like overpowered harbingers of death in Tier 1, but in Tier 2 onward you'll spend more time trying to stay out of the battle, only waiting for the occasional wounded straggler or ballsy heel boat to peel away from the fight, since everything else will shrug off your assault. Battleships are godly juggernauts, spraying damage everywhere in Tier 2, but Tier 3 will have them focused down by almost everyone, as many ships are now capable of burning their massive shields and health pools like tissue paper. It's almost to the point where Tier 1 feels like the game, and later tiers feel more like very difficult steps to reach Tier 4, especially if you're into the variety of ships and just like trying all of them out. The game is something I would suggest giving a try for a while, but just know that feeling of fun you're having at the start might possibly go south very fast. So, given the genre it sits within, you may well be thinking that the community and chats are going to be filled with hate and bile. Well, this is both true and not, as at times when people do actually speak, it comes across as the typical yelling at other players, many who may not even be able to read English as it is a worldwide server. Yet the vast majority of gamers see people not even using the chat, perhaps because of the aforementioned language barriers, but for whatever reason your matches will usually be a chatless affair, until they aren't. Oddly though, given that it is a worldwide server, the population feels very small as you'll run into a lot of familiar names over and over again with your time playing. Now this could well be a fluke, but it does seem to make the game feel more limited in player base, and it's of note that the game doesn't reveal any stats about how many people are playing online, like the others of the genre would. Due to how well bonuses you gain at later tiers carry over to even the first tier, there are a lot of players seal clubbing at Tier 1, which is not only effective but can easily be achieved throughout your crews and captain talents, giving you further edges over new players. Tier 1 though has different balancing than the remaining tiers, so it doesn't come across as a problem, just something to note, and many in Grindstone feel that Tier 1 is really about the only fun tier in the game. The real downside to the community is that some players can be frustratingly terrible. A game with 3 dimensions of movement, you'll find that friendly players often shove their ship right in front of your own while you're firing, or refuse to play the only objective in the match for whatever reason. I've seen ships on the point leave seconds before it was captured and resetting the progress on the entire thing. I've seen players with the treasure chest sit in the wrong point for minutes, not even trying to get to the correct point, until an enemy blasts them down and brings it to the correct area with little resistance. I've seen siege matches where both reactors went down with plenty of time to spare, able to blow open the door within 5 minutes, and have nobody else bother to shoot the door, instead focusing on racking up their kill count. Streams of the game have often devolved into yelling at random players doing incredibly stupid things that just make you shake your head and wonder, what made you think that would work? Part of the problem seems to be that classes don't have very defined identities throughout the game, as a Tier 1 torpedo clipper plays a different role than the Tier 2 torpedo clipper. Similar ships from either factions will oftentimes play nothing alike, requiring you to unlearn the playstyle of the first in order to understand the latter better. While the second major part of the problem is that there's no longer a players versus bots mode, so you can't practice how your ship plays or practice various game types, or perhaps most importantly, grind out the incredibly awful feeling of being in a stock boat without having to be thrown to the wolves first. Fortunately, you can group with other players, as we'd normally suggest to get around this dipshittery, though this comes with some odd restrictions. First and foremost of which is that only 3 players can enter random battles at a time. Sure, it looks like you can invite more people into the group, up to a maximum of 7, but this is only used for Brotherhood battles, and all other modes will refuse to start. The second, and perhaps most odd decision for groups, is that you're not allowed to play 2 of the same or similar class. While this means you can't do 2 battleships or 2 torpedo clippers, it also means that you can't do an engineering boat and a heel boat together either. This really seems like an odd choice, as if it was any other game within the genre, the matchmaker would simply adjust to ensure that team composition was roughly equal and let you go in. Sure, some of those matchmakers do that better than others, but Cloud Pirates isn't even trying in that regard. This will be a fairly short section of the review, mostly because there isn't all that much to talk about. This can certainly be a good thing given the genre this game sits within, but it does seem a little odd that there's so little here. First and foremost, the game's cash shop currency is known as rubies, or rubbies if you read it on the ordering form. Ruby rubbies come in packs of 750 for $4.99 or euros, 1600 for $9.99, 3,400 for $19.99, 9,500 for $49.99, and 21,000 for $99.99. Using these, you can choose to purchase Premium Time, a genre standard which increases the amount of golden experience that you'll earn per match, speed along the finishing of the treasure maps, and purchasing premium ships. Said premium ships, while being another staple of the genre, seem a bit odd here because they have no historical value outside of the game, and makes why you would want them all the more questionable. At least in competing titles like World of Warships, the premium ships have a history and a collector's value associated with them. Here it's just, hey, you want a fully stocked boat? We can't make a true judgment call on if these ships are considered pay to win either, something that Allods was saddled with pretty heavily. Because tech tree ships have so many upgrades to unlock and various modules, it's hard to give a comparison the same way competing titles can. If anything, it's a way to jump into higher tiers without having to suffer the upgrade grind, as I've found taking down these premium ships on my own can be pretty insufferable if they have even the faintest hit of backup, but they're hardly difficult to deal with overall, and they're not a very common sight within the game. So you might be asking, where are the cosmetics? While it is a staple of pretty much every free-to-play game, you don't just buy them in the cash shop, as they actually have their own currency to use. These are earned, or rather won, by using collector's treasure maps, a specific type of treasure map that has a chance of finding cosmetic items or special doubloons that can then be used to buy the cosmetics from an entirely different store within the game. They seem frustratingly expensive to unlock with a collector's doubloons, adding a grind to the simplicity of wanting to just turn your sails dark blue. I wouldn't be opposed to just being able to buy them, just saying. Why you gotta ruin everything, Overwatch? I am not one to avoid saying that this game has faults, as Dresker and many others in Grindstone certainly felt this way. But unlike quite a few in Grindstone, I really like this game. Cloud Pirates is to Wargaming-like titles what the Xbox version of Crimson Skies was to its PC counterpart. It's dumbed down, far easier to understand, and a lot more casual play friendly, but those looking for a more authentic simulation experience with strategic aiming, facing, and weak points are better off looking elsewhere. Those who want to shoot down floating skyboats by peppering them with flaming cannonballs, get in line behind me. Here's my final rating. If you're not a fan of the bombed-out wastelands and warfields of many wargaming titles, but enjoy the vehicle-based arena shooter, switching to a high fantasy style with flying pirate ships might be up your alley. This game is certainly a colorful and flashy take on the normally bleak-looking and industrial-themed genre. Since respawns are aplenty, and weak points and metas aren't really a mechanic, Cloud Pirates serves well as a game for those who just rather play on the casual level. You hop in, you do your dailies, you make some upgrade progress, you put some treasure maps into the queue, and you're on your way. You'd need a lot of invested time to work towards bigger tiers quickly, but since most of the fun seems to be on the lower tiers anyway, you may just have as much amusement playing the various styles of boat. Since matches don't go over 10 minutes regardless of progress, and you're not out in the minute you're taken down, you can make some risky maneuvers and try different playstyles very easily. Strategy may be important, but mistakes aren't punished with more than a respawn wave, which lends to an overall feel of action over methodical approaches, and it might be more of a draw to some audiences. Since the game follows the wargaming currency trend of using the cash shop points to purchase everything, there's only 2 things that are really worth getting if you're interested. Treasure maps will drop often once you unlock that feature, and using rubies to get the less lucrative maps out of your inventory quicker to free up space for better ones isn't a bad idea. Even more so when you use those rubies to buy extra map slots. Of course, the standard of premium time to speed along your XP and gold gains remains ever present, and if you're enjoying the game enough to play it daily, it certainly wouldn't hurt you, because it barely helps the tier 3 to 4 grind anyway, I'll tell you that much. Yeah, but that grind though, at first you might be thinking that only 4 tiers was a limited choice from the early launch and that'd be putting in more tiers shortly. But the sheer amount of time you'll spend getting from Tier 2 to 3 is made even worse when you get to Tier 3 and look at the ridiculous amount of high-priced upgrades and the painfully expensive Tier 4 ship cost on top of that. You'll spend a couple hours in your Tier 1 ship, maybe a day or two working past Tier 2, but Tier 3 is weeks of investment for anyone not focusing solely on one ship. Advancement is almost punishment in this case. I can tell they worked on Skyforge is all I'm saying. While playing the game isn't all that difficult to understand, if you do run across a group of players that still don't understand it, the game goes from being a fun, tense battle to a screaming exercise in frustration as players fly into your line of sight, refuse to get on points, steal power-ups from wounded ships, and plenty of other instances of herp-derpery that make you wonder if they should have made the tutorial just a little more in-depth, or perhaps solve a simple logic puzzle before you can sign up. Whether it's trolling or painful inexperience, your team can easily ruin your day in this game. Of course, the game's massive disconnect in how the ships are balanced is all based on your tier. Boats that are overpowered in one tier might be nigh useless in another, and vice versa. Every time I entered a new tier, I felt like I had to relearn the game, as powers, abilities, and overall capability of entire classes are tossed into the blender with each numbered upgrade. It's no wonder so many people are seal clubbing in Tier 1. It's the only time where the game makes any sense. Of course, this isn't entirely an issue with me, but I know it's an issue for many. My.com publishes this game, and if you have any personal vendetta or history with them for whatever reason, you may not be willing to give the game the time of day regardless. It's a fun title, but if the specter of the publisher is too much to bother to support them, don't worry, I get it. You do you. Next time, what could have been a backtrack will become a full episode again, as we dive back into Elder Scrolls Online and take a look at the Morrowind expansion. Hey, if you stuck around this long, you know the drill. Both windows will take you to other videos I've done. If you haven't caught me on Twitch at twitch.tv/chaosd1, you've missed out on some fun stream titles like Old Man Yells at Cloud Pirates. And if you'd like to join us in Grindstone, you can just head on over to discord.gg/wasgfns because we're not cool enough to get a URL you can actually remember and pronounce.